In 1950, America was telling itself a story about prosperity, but most kitchens hadn't gotten the message yet. Not the morning from the television commercials, the gleaming kitchen, the box of cereal, the father in a pressed shirt. That morning existed somewhere, for someone, but not for most. For most of America in the 1950s, morning smelled like rendered fat hitting a cold cast iron pan, like yesterday's biscuits warming near the stove, like cornmeal bubbling low on a back burner since before the sun came up. It was the smell of a mother who had been awake for an hour before anyone else, making something out of almost nothing and making it good. These were not backup meals. This was breakfast every morning. For millions of Americans, factory workers, sharecroppers, coal miners, immigrants, farm wives, and their children. And when those families sat down to eat, they did not feel sorry for themselves. They felt fed. We are counting down 25 of those breakfasts today. Some you will recognize, some you have never heard of. All of them were real. All of them worked. And all of them were erased not by accident, not by progress, but by a food industry that needed you to stop making breakfast and start buying it instead. Number 25. Brown sugar sandwiches. The bread came out of a wax paper sleeve and the butter had been sitting on the counter overnight so it spread without tearing. You pressed the brown sugar into it with the back of a spoon. Not a little, enough. Two halves pressed together, and that was breakfast. In rural Missouri, in the Ozarks, in farm kitchens across Kansas and Arkansas, this was not a treat. It was Tuesday. A loaf of bread cost 15 cents in 1953. A pound of brown sugar cost 7. A family of 5 ate breakfast for less than 4 cents a head. The molasses still in brown sugar. The thing that makes it brown is where the minerals live. Iron, calcium, potassium. Refined white sugar has none of that. The grandmothers weren't thinking about minerals. They were thinking about what they had and what their children needed, and how to connect those two things before the school bus came. Grandma just called it breakfast. She was right. Number 24. Molasses oatmeal. The pot went on first, always, before the fire was fully caught, before anyone else was awake. By the time the children came downstairs, the oatmeal had been cooking for 20 minutes thick enough to hold the spoon upright. Into each bowl went 1 tablespoon of blackstrap molasses, black as tar, bitter at the edges, sweet underneath. In the mill towns of New England and the coal hollows of West Virginia, this was the breakfast that built the morning shift. Rolled oats cost 8 cents a pound in 1952. Blackstrap molasses ran 14 cents a quart. The whole breakfast cost less than a penny per child. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Blackstrap molasses contains more iron per tablespoon than 3 ounces of beef, more calcium than a glass of milk. The women pouring it into bowls in 1952 did not know the names of those nutrients. They knew their children were strong. They knew the color in their faces. That is not a coincidence. That is generations of nutritional wisdom poured from a jar every morning before school. Number 23. Stewed prunes on toast. You put them in a small pot the night before dried prunes, a cup of water, nothing else, and left them where the pilot light kept things just above cold. By morning they had swelled back into something tender and dark, swimming in their own sweet liquid, spooned over yesterday's toast, slightly dried in the oven so it wouldn't go soggy immediately. This was a depression habit that survived intact into the 1950s in working-class households from Baltimore to Bakersfield. Dried prunes cost about 9 cents a pound in 1951. They needed no refrigeration. They did not spoil. In a household where the icebox was unreliable and the grocery store was 5 miles away, that mattered enormously. They knew things about dried fruit that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Soluble fiber, natural iron, vitamin K. The women stewing prunes on Tuesday night were not thinking about any of that. They were thinking about keeping their families fed and upright and moving, which is exactly what they accomplished. Today, a small jar of gourmet dried plums in syrup sells for $8. Grandma just called them prunes. Number 22. Apple butter on cornbread. In October, somewhere in Virginia or West Virginia or the Kentucky Highlands, a woman spent an afternoon at a wood fire stirring a copper kettle. Windfall apples, the imperfect ones, The ones that wouldn't keep cooked down with a little sugar and cinnamon until the whole thing darkened and thickened and held a line on the back of the spoon, poured into jars, sealed, put on the shelf. Every morning from October until March, she spread that apple butter on cold cornbread. One afternoon of labor in the fall fed a family through 5 months of winter mornings. The cornmeal cost 4 cents a pound in 1954. The apples were free. They fell from trees that were just there, on the property, expected to produce, expected to be used. This was not resourcefulness as a virtue. This was resourcefulness as survival, and the food it produced was magnificent. Number 21, jam and biscuit soup. The biscuits from supper were in the pan covered with a cloth, not fresh anymore, not meant to be eaten as biscuits anymore. That was fine. That was the point. You crumbled 2 into a bowl, rough pieces and soft pieces, poured warm water over them, added 1 spoon of jam, whatever jam was open, blackberry, peach, sometimes just grape jelly. 30 seconds to sit, then eaten slowly with a spoon before the house started moving. In rural Arkansas, this was called soppin' water. In parts of Tennessee, it had no name at all. It was simply what you did with yesterday's biscuits when there wasn't anything else, or when you were the first one up and you wanted something quiet and warm. This was not a recipe. It was a reflex, passed from mother to daughter without being written down, without being named, without anyone thinking it was worth preserving, and so it was lost. Number 20, sorghum and butter on biscuits. The biscuits came out of the oven hot enough that you had to hold them with the cloth, torn open while still steaming. Butter went on first and melted before you finished spreading it. Then the sorghum amber dark, poured slow from a canning jar, pooling into the craters where the butter had already soaked in. In the Ozarks and the hill counties of Missouri and Tennessee, sorghum was not a substitute for something better. It was the thing itself. A quart cost about 15 cents in 1953, or nothing at all if your family pressed their own cane in the fall. By the mid-1950s, Caro corn syrup was already moving into those kitchens. Not because sorghum had failed, not because anyone preferred corn syrup, but because Caro had a marketing budget and sorghum came from small farms and local mills that could not advertise. The taste that had defined 10,000 Ozark mornings was replaced by something thinner and sweeter and completely without character. That is not progress. That is the erasure of a flavor that took generations to love. Number 19, salt, mackerel, and potatoes. The fish had been soaking in cold water since the night before. That step could not be skipped. Salt mackerel packed hard in wooden barrels, preserved with enough salt to last months without refrigeration, had to give some of that salt back before it was fit to eat. By the time the potatoes were fried, the fish was ready. It went into the pan with sliced boiled potatoes and a rough-cut onion, cooking together until the fish edges went golden and the potatoes picked up the last of the salt and the fat. You ate it before 5 in the morning in the fishing towns of Massachusetts and Maine, because the boats left before light, and you needed something that would hold for 14 hours on cold water. Salt mackerel ran about 9 cents a pound in 1952. Portuguese families in New Bedford ate it. French-Canadian families in Gloucester ate it. Their grandchildren grew up eating frozen fish sticks and have no idea what they lost. Grandma just called it the morning fish. Number 18, milk toast. This one is different. This one was tenderness. Bread toasted just barely golden, not crisp, just warm and dry, laid in a shallow bowl. Whole milk heated on the stove until it steamed but did not boil, sometimes with a small spoon of sugar. Poured over the toast and served immediately while the bread still held its shape. This was what you made when someone was sick, when children had a winter cold, when the elderly grandmother upstairs couldn't manage anything solid. In New England households and immigrant kitchens from the Midwest to the Atlantic coast, milk toast was the food of care. It meant someone loved you enough to heat milk slowly and not let it scorch. By 1958, this had nearly vanished, replaced by cereal poured cold from a box in 90 seconds. The ritual of heating the milk, the slow pour, the watching of it soak in, none of that survived. We replaced tenderness with convenience and called it an upgrade. Number 17. Cheese and onion scramble. The onion went in first, always, into the lard or the bacon drippings until the edges turned amber and the kitchen filled with that smell, the smell that means something good is about to happen. Then the eggs, cracked directly into the pan and broken up with a fork right there in the heat, moving constantly, not waiting for them to set. The cheese came last, not shredded, broken into pieces, whatever hard cheese was in the house, whatever end of a block was left from the week before. Folded through rather than melted over, so you got pockets of soft cheese and pockets of egg and pockets of sweet onion, all in one forkful. In the Czech and German farming communities of the Texas Hill Country and the river towns of Missouri, this was not brunch. It had no fancy name. It was scrambled eggs with what was in the house, cooked hard and fast and eaten standing at the counter because there was work to do before 8. A dozen eggs cost 25 cents in 1954. The onion came from the garden. The whole breakfast cost less than 8 cents, and it was better than anything you will order at a brunch restaurant this weekend. Number 16. Sweet potato and molasses. The sweet potato had been in the oven the night before, tucked in next to whatever else was baking, using heat that was already there. By morning it was cold and dense and dark orange inside its skin, cut open, not reheated. Cold was fine. Cold was the point the starch had firmed overnight, and it sliced clean. The molasses went over the top, not a drizzle, a pour. The sweetness of the potato and the bitter-edged sweetness of the molasses meeting each other was not something you designed. It was something you discovered, and once discovered, it was not forgotten. Sweet potatoes cost about 3 cents a pound in 1,953 inches, the Deep South. They kept for months in a cool corner. They were full of beta-carotene that would keep your grandmother's eyes working well into her 80s. She didn't know the word beta-carotene. She knew she could still see. Number 15. Tomato gravy on biscuits. This is not marinara. Let that go completely. You started with pork drippings in the pan, whatever had collected in the jar by the stove from a week of bacon and fatback. Flour stirred into the fat until it turned the color of a brown paper bag. Then the canned tomatoes. A 10-cent can in 1953, crushed by hand directly into the pan. Water to thin it. Salt, black pepper, nothing else. It cooked down for 10 minutes while the biscuits finished. It turned orange-red at the edges, deeper at the center, small dark specks of pepper moving slowly in the simmer. You poured it over split biscuits in a shallow bowl. By the last bite, the whole thing had become something unified, neither biscuit nor gravy, but a third thing entirely, warm and thick and complete. In rural Texas and Oklahoma and the red dirt counties of Arkansas, tomato gravy was the weekday breakfast. Sausage gravy was for Sunday. This was Monday through Friday, feeding farm families and oil field workers and school children before the yellow bus came down the dirt road. Number 14. Coffee soup. The coffee in a 1950s working-class household was thin, made to stretch a smaller scoop, hot water poured twice over the same ground sometimes. The color of tea. Honest rather than sophisticated. Yesterday's bread went into it. The heel of the loaf, slightly stale, broken into a bowl, the hot coffee poured over. Sometimes a spoon of sugar. Eaten fast, standing at the counter, because the shift started at 6. In Cajun, Louisiana, they had been doing this since before anyone could remember. In French immigrant communities of New England, they called it soup au lait and did not consider it poverty food. In rural Missouri, it had no name and no ceremony. It was just what you did when the bread was stale and the coffee was already made and you had 20 minutes before you had to leave. In rural France and parts of Quebec, some people still do this. They don't know they're keeping something alive. They just know it tastes like morning. Number 13, Fried apple rings. You cored the apple but did not peel it. The peel stayed on, that was where the pectin lived, the thing that helped the ring hold its shape in the pan. Sliced crosswise into rings about a finger thick, laid into the cast iron with a tablespoon of lard already hot. 3 minutes on the first side without being touched. When you turned them, the underside was genuinely golden brown, slightly caramelized, and the kitchen had filled with a smell that was warm and sweet and vaguely spiced, even though no spices had been added. A few minutes on the second side, and they came out still holding their ring shape, soft in the center and golden at the edges. In the hill counties of Appalachian Virginia and West Virginia and western North Carolina, this was the sweet course of a working breakfast. Not dessert, breakfast. The apples came from trees that were just there. On the property, windfall apples, imperfect ones, too small or too spotted for any other purpose, finding their best purpose in a hot pan at 7 in the morning. Number 12, pinto bean breakfast. The pot had been on the night before for supper, and what remained this morning was everything supper had not consumed. Pinto beans, cooked slow with a ham hock or a piece of fatback, sitting overnight, thickening, the liquid turning to something between broth and gravy. In the morning the pot went back on the fire. Nothing added, just heated what was there. The beans had absorbed most of the liquid overnight, and what remained was dense and dark and had a depth of flavor that newly cooked beans never had. A bowl of them, cornbread on the side, a fried egg on top if the hens had cooperated. That was breakfast. Dried pinto beans cost about 7 cents a pound in 1,953 inches, West Texas and New Mexico. A pound fed a family of 5 for 2 days, breakfast and supper, from a single pot. Less than 2 cents per person per meal, and the protein content of that bowl exceeded what was in 2 eggs. They knew things about beans that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 11. Grits with pot liquor. Stone-ground grits, not instant, not quick, the kind that took 40 minutes and needed watching and would not be rushed bubbling slow in a heavy pot since before the sun came up. By breakfast they were thick and pale yellow and smooth in a way only long cooking achieves. The pot liquor came from the greens pot. Collard greens had cooked the night before with smoked pork, and what remained in the bottom after the greens were served was not discarded. Dark and silky, tasting of long-cooked pork and bitter green and wood smoke, it was ladled over the grits in the morning. The grits cost 4 cents a pound in 1954. The pot liquor cost nothing. It was what remained after supper was already made. The cooking liquid from leafy greens carries every mineral the greens release during the long simmer. Iron, calcium, folate, B vitamins. A bowl of pot liquor over grits matched or exceeded any fortified breakfast cereal of the mid-1950s at a fraction of the cost, made from things that would otherwise have been thrown away. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 10. Salt and pepper biscuits. No milk, no butter, no egg. Just flour, lard, water, salt, and black pepper ground coarse, more than you think, pressed into the dough before it was cut. These were water biscuits, the poorest biscuit in the American kitchen, and in many households, the daily biscuit. The crust was harder, the inside was chewier. The pepper came through clearly because there was nothing rich to mute it. They were smaller than Sunday biscuits. They were darker at the edges. They were magnificent. A batch of 20 enough to feed a family of 5 cost less than 4 cents in 1954. The flour was kept in a large tin. The lard was rendered from the last hog killing. You ate them with whatever was on the table, sorghum, apple butter, a smear of lard, or nothing at all. You ate them because they were hot and the day was going to be long and cold, and they would carry you until noon without complaint. Number 9. Drippings toast. On the counter near the stove, in every working-class kitchen in America, there was a jar. Into it went everything, the fat that ran off the bacon, the drippings from the pork roast, the clear yellow liquid that pooled under the chicken. It hardened at room temperature into something pale and dense and full of flavor. In the morning, you spread it on toast, not thinly, not apologetically, the way you would spread butter, with a knife and a certain authority. You ate it before it could cool, because warm drippings toast was a different thing from cold drippings toast, and the difference mattered. In the factory towns of industrial Ohio and Indiana, in the steel neighborhoods of Pittsburgh and Gary, this was the working man's breakfast. Fast, hot, high-calorie. It required one piece of bread and a jar that filled itself every time meat was cooked. It cost nothing beyond what was already being spent. Today, a small jar of beef tallow spread sells at specialty shops for $12. The food influencers who discovered rendered animal fat describe it as an ancient superfood. They are not wrong about the ancient part. That is not progress. That is 100-year theft sold back to you at a markup. Number 8. Sweetened, condensed milk on bread. The can was not opened every day. It was opened when something needed celebrating, or when the week had been hard and the children needed something that felt like abundance, even if it wasn't. 2 holes punched in the top with an ice pick, then drizzled, not poured, drizzled over fresh bread or a biscuit, enough to taste it, enough to feel the sweetness coat the back of your throat. Sweetened condensed milk cost about 20 cents a can in 1953, and used carefully, stretched across a week of breakfasts. In Puerto Rican households in New York and Cuban immigrant families in Tampa and Miami, this was not poverty food. This was childhood. This was the taste that meant morning, that meant home. In rural South Carolina and Georgia, it appeared in black families' kitchens as a sweetener when fresh dairy was inaccessible. It crossed every boundary of region and ethnicity because it delivered sweetness, fat, and comfort for almost nothing. Grandma just called it the good milk. And Thursday, when the can came out, was a good morning. Number 7. Fried potatoes and onions. The potatoes had been boiled the night before. That was the key. Already boiled potatoes sliced and laid into a pan of hot lard with rough-cut onion, cooked in 8 minutes. You pressed them down with the back of the spatula and let them go until the bottom was genuinely brown, the kind that tastes of caramelization and fat and salt. Then turned them once. Salt, pepper, and the fat in the pan. That was everything. In the Irish-American neighborhoods of South Boston and Dorchester, in the coal mining towns of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, fried potatoes and onions was not a side dish. It was breakfast. The miners going underground at 5:30 needed carbohydrates and fat, and they needed them to hold for 6 hours in the dark. Potatoes cost 2 cents a pound in 1953. Onions ran 3 cents. A breakfast that carried a man through 6 hours of hard physical labor underground cost less than a nickel. And it was satisfying in a way that no amount of fortified cornflakes could replicate. Number 6. Cornbread and buttermilk. Cold. Both of them cold. That is the thing people always get wrong when they try to reconstruct this. The cornbread is not heated. The buttermilk is not warmed. A wedge of last night's cornbread, dense and slightly dry now, as cornbread gets crumbled into a glass or a deep bowl. Cold buttermilk poured over. The thick, real buttermilk, the kind that pours slowly and smells almost sour and coats the inside of the glass. Eaten with a spoon, slowly, letting the buttermilk soften the cornbread from the outside in, while the center stays slightly firm. The temperature is cold. In summer, that is a pleasure. In winter, it is a discipline. Throughout the South and in Appalachian households from Georgia to Kentucky, this was the breakfast that asked nothing of you. No cooking, no fire, no time. Buttermilk ran about 12 cents a quart in 1954. The cornbread was already made. The whole thing cost 4 cents, and on certain mornings that was exactly right. Number 5. Fried green tomatoes with sawmill gravy. The tomatoes were green because green was what the August garden offered before the fruit had ripened, and a green tomato dredged in cornmeal and laid in hot fat becomes something different from what a red tomato would become. Firmer, tartar, holding its shape. developing a crust a ripe tomato couldn't sustain. The sawmill gravy was made in the same pan after the tomatoes came out. Fat left behind, flour stirred in, then milk poured slowly while you whisked. White, flecked with black pepper, poured over the tomatoes while everything was still hot. In the farming counties of rural Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, this was not a restaurant appetizer. It was breakfast. Eaten at 6 in the morning by families who grew their own tomatoes and rendered their own fat. 70 years later, a version of this dish appears on brunch menus in Atlanta and Charleston for $13 a plate, described as a Southern classic. It is a Southern classic. It always was. The people who invented it charged nothing for it because it grew in their yard. Number 4. Leftover biscuits soaked in sorghum. The biscuit went on the plate and the sorghum went over it, not drizzled, poured, and then you waited. Half a minute. Long enough for the sorghum to find the cracks and begin working its way in. Long enough for the bottom to go soft while the top stayed slightly firm. Then broken apart with a fork, each piece carrying both textures, the sorghum and everything by then. In parts of the Ozarks and the hill counties of Tennessee, this was called soppin'. The biscuit was not a vehicle for the sorghum. They were equal partners in something better than either alone. You sopped until the plate was clean. That was the whole philosophy. Yesterday's biscuits. Homemade sorghum. Two things that cost almost nothing, left over from meals already eaten. This breakfast cost nothing. It asked nothing. It tasted like the specific sweetness of a morning when you had nowhere urgent to be, and the jar of sorghum was full and everything, briefly, was sufficient. Number 3. Mush puppies. Not hush puppies. Different. Smaller, plainer, made from the same cornmeal mush that had been cooking since early morning, the thick porridge but formed into small rough rounds and dropped into hot fat, where they puffed and crisped and turned golden brown in 3 minutes. No egg, no sugar, no additions. Just cornmeal and water and salt, cooked down to mush and then formed and fried. The outside went hard and crackled when you broke it. The inside stayed soft and white. You ate them with cane syrup, not maple, not honey. The thin, dark cane syrup from coastal South Carolina and Louisiana, with a flavor darker and more complicated than any substitute. In the Gullah communities of the Carolina coast and in the Creole households of Louisiana, these appeared on breakfast tables in the 1950s with no explanation and no ceremony, the way things appear when they have always been there. They had no restaurant version. They did not survive the decade in any documented form. They were eaten by people who are now very old or no longer alive, and when those people were gone, the recipe went with them. Grandma just called them mush cakes, and they were gone before anyone thought to ask. Number 2. Crackers and cane syrup. Saltines. A sleeve of them, already open from yesterday, slightly soft at the edges because the Louisiana humidity gets into everything. Laid on a plate and the cane syrup poured over thin and amber, the specifically Louisiana product from the sugarcane fields just down the road, about 18 cents a quart in 1952. The syrup pooled in the small holes punched in each cracker and ran to the edges and onto the plate, and you ate them quickly before they went completely soft. This was children's breakfast on a school morning. But it was also old men's breakfast, the same 5 crackers, the same pour, eaten slowly at a kitchen table in the early light with a cup of thin coffee. The age of the person eating it changed nothing about what it was. That syrup is nearly gone now. The small mills that produced it went out one by one through the 1960s and 1970s, unable to compete with corn syrup and the distribution networks that pushed corn syrup into every pantry in the country. What replaced it is sweeter and thinner and has no complexity and no place. Cane syrup was Louisiana's. Corn syrup belongs to no one. Number 1. Fatback gravy. Here is the one that holds all the others together. You started with the fatback itself, salt-cured pork fat, the cheapest cut of the cheapest animal, about 8 cents a pound in 1953. A thick slice laid in the cast iron over medium heat. It rendered slowly, the fat releasing, the meat going from white to golden to brown, the pan filling with liquid fat that smelled of salt and pork and something older than any recipe. When the fat back was crisp, you lifted it out. The flour went in 2 tablespoons, stirred constantly until it turned the color of a walnut shell and smelled like toasted bread. Then the milk, poured in slowly while you whisked, thickening fast. Salt and a serious amount of black pepper. Done. Poured over everything. Over biscuits split open, over cornbread, over fried potatoes, over plain bread. It was thick enough to hold the spoon and hot enough to steam, and it smelled like every working-class kitchen in America smelled between 1,930 and 1,960. This is the one they replaced first. Butter-flavored vegetable shortening, margarine, low-fat everything. They told you the fat was the enemy, and they were wrong enough that 3 generations of Americans grew up without knowing what a proper gravy tasted like, and the pan that made it went into a garage sale for $1.50. And the woman who could make it in the dark by feel and smell and the sound of the flour in the fat went to her grave with that knowledge still in her hands. She was right. Everything she knew was right,